Beyond Goodbye is a podcast that explores dying, death, and grief, and may contain sensitive or distressing material that could be triggering for some individuals and is not suitable for all audiences. Therefore, listener discretion is advised. Marital status? She asked. Marital status? I panicked. I am married. Wait, no, I'm not. I'm single. Well, sort of. Am I a widower who is single? A single person who had a wife and therefore a widower? Am I still married without a spouse? The receptionist asked again. Sir, marital status? Widower, I said out loud for the first time. When I left the appointment, I sobbed in the parking lot the way that most people cry the day of a person's death. I felt a gut-twisted feeling. I may not stop crying. Welcome back, friends, to episode 7 of Beyond Goodbye, Rebuilding Life After Loss. I am your host, Angela Sturm. The short excerpt I'd read at the beginning of our show is from an essay in the Huffington Post written by Dan Fogel, an author, entrepreneur, and semi-retired academic. Here, he is explaining what was going on inside his mind when asked about his marital status after his wife of 45 years, Sue, passed away from cancer in 2018. I think those of us who have lost someone can relate to what Dan described. I know it resonates well with me. I recall the first time I was asked if I had children, do they live here in Minnesota? I was stumped by all the questions, and I really wasn't sure how to answer. In my head, it went something like this. Yes, I have children, but then do I? I have one, but not 3 anymore. Should I say yes, I have children, but 2 are deceased? No. I should say I have a child, not plural. Is that even anyone's business? Do I need to explain myself? This was an awful place to be. Now, when someone asks me if I have children, I say yes. How many? 3. Do they all live close? Yep. And that's it. But I still cry after these encounters. The chatter that goes on inside of us matters. It can be constructive or destructive. That voice might say, we should not be happy. Our daughter, son, mom, wife is dead. There's no joy in that. Or this voice might say something like, would daughter, mom, son, wife really want you in bed all day, quitting your job, crying all the time? It's like the story about the wolf inside us and which one to feed. And in order to find happiness, value, and purpose again, we must focus on feeding the right wolf. We must manage the chatter, encourage or feed the positive voice, and quiet the negative one. Our future's potentiality depends on it. The question then becomes how. Everyone is different, and we bring our own baggage, constraints, and beliefs that shape our journeys. How can we reconcile loss with our future and find life enjoyable again? Well, in today's episode, my guest, Dan Fogel, has joined me to talk about rebuilding life and finding joy after losing someone we love. Both Dan and I will share some of the transformative ways we've approached our grief, which has contributed to some personal growth and resilience. Dan, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks, Angela.
Yeah, I'm real happy that you agreed to join. For those of you listening, Dan wrote this essay that I mentioned at the beginning in the Huffington Post, and I read it, and it really, really moved me. Like I could feel it real deep in my bones. So then that prompted me to reach out to him. Those of you who know me well, I can be a little impulsive. So I reached out, not expecting to get any kind of response, asked if he would be willing to speak with us on Beyond Goodbye and kind of share his lost story and journey, and he agreed. So we have him here, and I'm very grateful that you've agreed to share that and be vulnerable to our audience here. So I'm curious as to, well, first, share your story, but why did you share that on the Huffington Post? That's pretty vulnerable. It makes you very vulnerable to a very wide audience of people.
Yeah, I guess I didn't even expect how vulnerable it was. So basically that article is a platform or structure for a larger memoir that I'm writing. And after my wife died, trying to come to grips with that. And one way I did it was to write a lot. And I've been an academic my whole life. So I've been writing in the third person, and all of a sudden I'm writing in the first person about something very personal.
Yeah.
My main motivation was really I started to understand that I was hoping that I could help other people, that I could offer something to other people, especially younger couples and younger people who could look at their relationships in a slightly different way, and a way that I discovered after my wife died. So that was the primary motivation, and is the motivation for me to continue to write. But I was shocked by the response, because the editor told me it was the most read article ever in Huffington Post Personal, and that surprised me. And I got over 400 emails. One woman not everybody was positive. One woman sent me an email. She says, "You're a jerk and a douche," and I wrote her back and I said, "Yep, that's me too." So it's like people have their own responses. They bring their own baggage, if you will.
Right.
To things. But it's gratifying. Most of the emails and most of the response, and even the negative ones have been, people are resonating with something in there.
Right. They're talking about it.
Right.
I mean, that's the point. Part of the point, is to get that dialogue going. That's how I envision the podcast a bit, is reaching
Right.
people and wanting people to have conversations around loss and grief and what it does to us and what it does to families. And then, of course, that introspection you talked about. You read a lot, you went to some therapy, you did some of your own work, and were surprised by some things. One of the things you said was that your perceptions of your wife, Sue, and yourself and the marriage changed.
Right.
How?
Yeah, well, excellent. I mean, in a lot of different ways, but one thing I realized is that through our life, we had this notion that a successful marriage was a long marriage, and a successful marriage was kind of a peace at all costs marriage. So it was non-conflictual. And of course, that's what I call a near enemy, which I use the Buddhist term near enemies, which are things that seem positive, but really can create negative outcomes. And so sometimes we wouldn't get to the authenticity, the authentic feelings and express those, because that comes out sometimes as conflict, or comes out very forcefully. So this notion, peace at all costs, is very much, and it's a way that we both grew up too, I think. Right. And in our families. So there was a rationale why that happened, but didn't realize how powerful it was. So afterwards, that was one major wake-up call. And the other was a lot of learning about her and about myself in things that I didn't realize. Like, for example, I had my whole ADHD all my whole life, and it wasn't until after Sue died that I said, wait a minute, there's actually a label for all this craziness that I went through, my behavior. So that's some of the things, and incredible. And I learned those through talking to other people about her, through her journals, and reflecting a lot on our marriage.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you're right. It does, I think, generationally dictate how relationships go. I'd asked somebody, when you said that, it brought me back to, I was at my youngest son, Zach, was a football player, and I was at one of his games, and there was a couple next to me, and they had to be in their 80s, and they had been married forever. And I asked her, I'm like, how are you married for so long? Mine lasted 7 years. And she said, because I have to. This is how we grew up, and you get married, you don't get divorced. And, when we got married, women didn't work. And so I relied on him. And as we aged and grew, there was no way I could take care of myself alone. And she says, just what you did. It's not now, today, where now, I mean, you're lucky to have a marriage last 5 years, I think. So, there's a lot of work that goes into a marriage as well. I'm sure, I know my dad talks about that a lot, that it's, it took the first 20 years for them to even like each other, and, kind of the joke, but I agree with that. Do you find yourself struggling with anything? For example, in your essay, you expressed a desire to have another chance to ask Sue some questions.
Absolutely.
So do you struggle with the fact that you can't now? And if you could, what would you ask?
Yeah, I think, you know, I have a chapter in my memoir. It's a dream sequence of if heaven had visiting hours, and in there I think the major thing that I would do is ask a lot more why and tell me more. I don't think there was enough of that. I think we left out those questions in our interactions, and we just accepted the initial comments or initial ways of being. And so this notion of asking why is tell me more. How did you feel about that? And honoring that. That's the other part of it. So that I found upon reflection that there was many points along the way that I could have accepted more. I could have not turned off. I probably, after a while, I think Sue just said, well, it ain't worth it because he ain't going to listen anyhow. And so I'd like to ask her about that. And because it feels regretful, guilty about that. And I read recently a book, a fantastic book that I commend to people. It's David Brooks, who's a conservative commentator, wrote a book on how to know a person. And he's trying to problem solve political differences amongst people on how you get people to talk together. But it has a lot of resonance for couples, for all sorts of relationships. Just came out in October. A fantastic little book.
What was the author's name?
David Brooks.
Brooks.
How to Know a Person. And but anyhow, and it's almost like grief on grief in a sense, because not only are you grieving the loss of the person, but your identity changes and your way of being and all the assumptions you had change. And so you're trying to come to grips with more than just the loss of the person. And
yes.
So I bet you've experienced some of that as well. This how do I, as you referred to it, how do you call yourself? How do you identify?
It's heavy. It's heavy. I remember after that thinking, I felt prior to their deaths that I had a pretty good life. Like I was doing things I wanted. I knew who I was, although that's always evolving. You're not that same person that I was at 20 that I am now. But after that happened, all of that just didn't really have any meaning anymore. And I remember just sitting in my living room and crying, thinking, I don't know who I am. Who am I? I know I'm still a mom, but who am I? And I don't think I have that answer yet. I'm working on that and exploring that and trying to, see it through the lens of something exciting and new. And, I'm going to create who I am versus becoming what all of my experiences have made me. But that's heavy.
It's heavy and it's healthy too, right? Because so many men, in particular, my experience, I've been talking to a lot of men who they read some of my work or they know that I lost my wife of a long time and they had a similar situation, and they hadn't been stopping to think about these things. They want to move on. It's like almost filling a hole, okay, let me get what I had before so that I can just move on. And rather than looking at this as a real privilege, first of all, to grieve. I mean, in a sense, we love somebody.
Yeah.
And what a privilege to have loved somebody deeply that it really affects you that way. And then also to an opening to explore some of these issues. And that helps to heal. Denying that is perversely, something that would really make us less able to heal, less able to deal with the loss, I think.
It drags out that grieving. I'm watching that with my father. He's just really, really struggling to embrace where he's at right now and what he lost, because he cried. He doesn't like to cry, and he cries about it, and he feels that deeply. And
Yeah.
he's really struggling with that. We're working on it, but it's exactly how you just described, trying to fill that hole, to have what he had when there's no filling that.
Mhm.
So what path have you taken, or are you on, or maybe it's both, to rebuild from that loss? Like, what are some of the steps and things that you've done? I know that you did some research and some writing and,
Right.
therapy, but is there anything else that you have?
Well, I started with what I knew best, which was doing the research, reading a lot, etc.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I've added on to all that was the reading memoirs, reading people's experiences,
Mm.
and then following up and trying to talk with people about specifics that they went through, and that was one thing. The other thing is that I've come up with some ideas about how relationships could be more fulfilling or more deeper or more authentic. I could be more vulnerable. And
Mm.
so as I come upon those, I use them with my daughters, with my friends, and I have to be open because it's a new way for them to relate to me.
Yeah.
I have one daughter in particular, as we've had a conflictual little bit relationships, and so we've been able to heal a little bit using some of this knowledge that I've had, and also talking it in the context of my wife.
Mm-hmm.
Lost their mother. I lost my wife, and we were able to talk about that in relationship to her.
Yeah.
It was difficult for them to admit that, oh, wait a minute, there was mom, there was the wife, and then there was her. And
Mm.
coming to grips with her as a person was much more difficult for them.
Interesting. Yeah. And well, and it's a new way for you too. So there's, little baby steps in that. I
Right.
know for myself, I started out with real small changes. I've always been someone who meditates, but I did that a little more than normal. And then I started really incorporating journaling. And that helped me to kind of shift my perspective, just writing it out, just writing whatever out there. And it helped me to kind of reevaluate my priorities. I would look at some of my life goals that I had written in previous journals to now, like, those aren't my goals anymore. And then of course I did the therapy and the research. I love to research and write and read. So a lot of what you did um, there as well. Do you find it now that you have like some specific mental health tools, like a mental health toolbox, as an
Mhm.
example, from your research and therapy?
Yeah, I definitely like I can give you very specific examples. One thing that I realize, and I pass on to a lot of people, is that our bodies, our minds, go through some natural changes after we lose somebody. So there's a woman named Mary Frances O'Connor who talks about the grieving brain.
Mm-hmm.
How we're separated from the brain, keeps looking for this person, keeps
Yes.
wanting to incorporate them, and has to learn anew the absence. So learning some of that was very helpful and has been helpful to other people. The other thing is that some of the relationship tools, if you will, I use is don't make assumptions, don't think things personally. I have some of these kind of mantras that I keep in my mind, and so that have been very helpful. I don't know if I would have discovered several of those, or as forcefully or as usefully,
Mm-hmm.
um, had I not gone through this difficult time. So I would give anything to have Sue back, but I just think that also I didn't want to let myself, and I'm 76 years old. I'm at the end of my runway here. So I asked my therapist, I said, does anybody my age really do this stuff? She says, nope.
My dad's the same age.
So, so, but I didn't really, and that's a way to honor Sue too. I mean, I
Right.
think I really believe that. I think the article was, my intent was to, as a cautionary tale, but also as an honor to her.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
hope she would be proud about it.
I'm certain she probably was, or is, depends on your beliefs, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah, I have Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor's book, and she was on episode 5, which we got a lot of positive feedback. It was a really different way to explore and understand grief, and it really does change not only the brain but physically, like the body. I went through a time where I my whole body just shut down. I could barely walk upstairs. If I did minor cleaning around the house and I sat down, I got stiff. I couldn't move. And I didn't know what was going on. It was the strangest thing. I had been an active, athletic person most of my life. And to be at a place where I can barely walk up the stairs, it was scary. I was in and out of doctors, and it didn't dawn on me until later, like, duh, you've,
Right.
lost 2 children and your mom. Plus, I'd helped to care for my mom. My brother and I did with my dad until she passed. And it was a lot. And as soon as I admitted that, and then started to take that into account as I did some of more natural things with not just meditation and journaling, but the breathing and changing some of the foods that I was eating and getting out and just being in nature, made a huge difference. I
Right.
also use a lot of creative expression. I find I've always been kind of a writer and an artist anyhow, but I find that is very relaxing and is a relief. And I've recently taken up the saxophone and flute, which
There you
prior to that, I
go.
couldn't read a note to save my life. And I know that my mom and Jasmine and Matthew would be laughing right now. They would say, "Of course you are." I'm more of a self-taught of anything, so I've been teaching myself this, and as soon as I get bored with it, it'll catch dust somewhere. But yeah, I can just hear them laughing and see that, and that brings me joy. And that's the point,
Right. That's
is
the
to,
point.
yeah, to have some joy and to just think of that and how they would find that to be very me.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent.
Uh,
And you gave yourself permission to actually act.
yeah,
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 that's the interesting thing because her book, Mary Frances O'Connor's book, really helped me say, wait a minute, just relax.
yeah,
You're going through a natural process,
yeah.
and see where you can take it and feel it,
Hmm.
feel it, and move on. Another woman who really helped me was Brene Brown, and her work. She's amazing. She wrote a book called Atlas of the Heart recently, which
Oh,
is a summary of a lot of her work about labeling emotions and her kind of theory of things, if you will.
hmm.
But she talks a lot about how emotion works and the difference between shame and guilt and
Oh,
et cetera, et cetera. She's really excellent, and she's a great speaker she's on. You can find her on YouTube and
yeah.
whatnot. She's a professor down at the University of Houston, and um, and her her what she gave me was a language also to talk about my grief. So what I learned from her and what I learned from other people is I listened very carefully to how they talked about it and tried on some things, what not to say.
Hmm. Hmm.
So many people are so awkward when they approach you, right? They don't know what to say to you, and
Yeah.
they get tongue tied. And
Yeah. Yeah. We had actually an episode on that for supporters
you do excellent,
on what to say and what maybe not to say,
right?
and and people change too. I mean, grief is such a strong emotion,
Mhm.
and we know that everything is energy, right? So you have this strong emotion that's just emitting from you, and it can fill a room, and people get so quiet and uncomfortable and say nothing, or they think it's comforting to say you'll get over it soon, when you're never going to get over it.
Right,
But
yeah.
they just, they're just not thinking, they just don't know what to say, and they feel like they need to say something. Or then
Say
you
something.
have those who just stop talking to you, and that
Stop.
you've known for
Right.
years and years, and all of a sudden, you they've ghosted you. And that,
Mhm.
and I'd read stuff like that happens, but to have it actually happen, or to have comments that were made, I had somebody even reach out to me and want me to comfort her over the loss of my children. Like, she was struggling with this. She'd known them for a long time. And I
Mhm.
just thought that was just so inappropriate. And yeah, it was hard to be around that and also trying to figure out what's going on in my own head.
Yeah, right. All of that all at once, you know.
Yeah.
And one thing, it's interesting you mentioned energy, because what I've done is I've stopped believing that I have to be with certain people.
Mhm.
And so people who draw my energy down, I've really distanced myself
Mhm.
from them for whatever reason. I mean, it's not anything that they did specifically. It's the state where I am,
Right.
and I don't have to apologize for that.
No, no, that's probably one of the biggest changes for me after the kids died, um, was looking at, why am I hanging around this person, that person, or always being the yes person when I don't want to? And like you said, it might not necessarily be them. It's just me and what I need and what I want and don't want.
Exactly.
And I
Exactly.
had to stop shaming myself and thinking I was being selfish, because selfish isn't a bad thing, depending on how it's how you use that, what it means to you. And if I need not to be around you because it's upsetting,
Exactly. You
you
know,
know.
it's really interesting. I brought into the narrative, my wife said before she died, she says, you need to find somebody quickly, because you need somebody in your life like that. And I bought into that. And so 6 months after she died, I started trying to date, and this crazy online stuff, you know.
Yeah.
I hadn't dated in 45 years, right?
Right.
So, but it was really terrible for a while. It was
Mhm.
awful. And I turned to myself, I said, what are you doing? You know, why? Just because you bought into that narrative? And so I let it go for a while, you know, and
Mhm.
then when I was ready again, I got back into it. But
Right.
that was way too soon.
Yeah.
uh,
Well, you hadn't even done the
for me.
grieving or
Right.
the work on yourself to,
Right.
yeah, to even know what you want anymore, because there's nobody that can replace Sue.
No,
There's
no
no one
way.
that is going to be to you what she was to you. And so
You're not kidding.
understanding that, yeah, understanding that and knowing that the next person, if you find that person, is going to be someone very different who meets other needs for you. And yeah,
and
it's,
and and honors that. I mean,
yeah,
I
right.
went out with a woman, and she said I just got out of a 3-year relationship. I said, why'd you get out of the relationship? She said, well, he didn't want to get married. He wouldn't take his pictures down of his dead wife. He spent too much time with his family. And I said,
Oh,
and the problem is what? And,
right.
and it was like,
Wow.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so it was that late date not only didn't last long, but we never met again.
I don't doubt it. I think that would be a turnoff, even if weren't married
Yeah,
or had
right.
never been married, had that.
Just yeah, I mean, I don't know why. Yeah, I mean, and I wear the rings or
Mhm.
wedding rings around my neck. And,
Yeah, my dad still wears his on his finger.
yeah,
Um, so it's been probably what, 5.5 years since Sue's
right.
passed.
Right. Yeah, and she's 5 years before that she was diagnosed. Right. It was a
Oh,
misdiagnosis too.
yeah, I read that in your essay. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
So I was really angry for a while.
I bet.
Really angry. I mean, I had to actively forget the radiologist's name and where he worked, and the whole
Mm,
bit. It
mm,
was awful, because she essentially be light of day.
right. Right. So do you still, even after, the 5 years, do you still find yourself having to make like conscious decisions and effort to live fully? Or has this
Yes.
gotten any easier for you?
No, 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 no. It actually, it's gotten a little, I don't want to say harder. It's just it's constant work,
Mm,
and you got to stay with it. And what I mean by that is, a combination of trying to write about it, and at the same time trying to understand what I'm going through. And as I write, I discover more,
oh,
and
yeah.
as I discover more, you got to deal with it. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
nothing's
yeah.
free,
Right.
And so, um, I told there was one guy who said, oh, I'm not going to do all that work. I said, then don't, because you're gonna get into a worse hole. I said, then find a way that you can live peacefully with yourself. But
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
you're right. You're right with that. Now that I'm thinking about that, because my thought has always been, well, if I write about this, if I talk about this, um, it'll be fine, and it won't be something that creeps up on me anymore. But it does open other, it's like peeling back that onion. It's like,
right,
oh, well, I didn't even know I had this to address, and and now I'm
right.
working on that part. And then, yeah, you're right. And it's not for everybody. It's a lot of work. I
Hmm.
mean, just even bettering yourself is a lot of work without having to deal with grief on top of that. What
But I
would you
wouldn't
say?
trade it for anything.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't either. I wouldn't either. It's hard. It's hard for anyone, especially newer, and even my dad, because he's not processing, he's
Mm.
not where I'm at right now. And we all do it differently. Um, but I think it's hard to look at it as it was a good thing, it was a blessing. And like you said, to actually have found somebody you loved like that and so deeply, that's a
Hmm.
blessing. And that comes with also
Right.
losing them and some grief. Um, but it is a lot of work, and it brings
Hmm.
up so many things. But I will say that I feel more whole when I do that. And I feel more genuine when I'm around people, not just genuine to people, but for myself. And I think
Yeah,
that's
I know.
important to do in general.
Yeah, and I thought I was ready, because 5 years of preparation,
Mm,
it's not like a sudden death,
right.
right? And
Right.
and it's very different. And so it's I I don't know how to describe it. I wasn't ready. I
Hmm.
thought I was, but and we had talked very openly about life after her. She told me very succinctly. She knew me well, so she told me very succinctly, like, for example, just do one thing at a time, because my
Hmm.
brain works like a pinball machine. I just
Hmm.
all over the place,
Yeah.
and I'm likely to bounce and not make any sense. And so anyway, but it still was like starting at day one.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And my mom had got diagnosed with bulbar ALS. And 8 months after that diagnosis, she died.
hmm,
But watching her body deteriorate the way that it did, she was very, very fit woman. We all thought she would outlive all of us, to be honest. And so when she had this diagnosis, it dragged on, and she got sicker, and it was scary, and she was scared. There was
hmm,
absolutely nothing that could be done. There were no treatments. There's no treatments for ALS. And then, my dad was with her 24/7. He made a promise that she could stay home until she couldn't, and
hmm,
then we had to insist that she be brought to a hospice because he couldn't do this by himself. And my brother and I, we still had to work. We couldn't take, all this time off to help care for mom. And so it was really hard. And so my dad, I know, has some anger towards what's happened and is struggling to really reconcile what
yeah,
he had to do. And that's very different than with Jasmine and Matthew having been murdered. I mean,
right, right.
it went boom. One day they're here, the next day they're not. So I don't know that I would want a death to drag out, to be honest. Um, I think that would be harder than somebody who's gone right away. I don't know because I've experienced it with my mom, but she was my mom. She wasn't my spouse or my child. So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
hard to see him with that. It's a lot to deal with.
Hmm.
What would you say inspires you today?
I think my motivation, what keeps me really going, is a couple things. One is I have 7 grandchildren.
Mm.
I have a 5-year-old grandchild who is exactly like me when I was a kid, and except he's like my mirror. Things in the mirror are closer than they appear,
Hmm.
and he is right there with me, and I see when he acts and how people react to him, how people must have reacted to me, but they didn't have any idea what was going on.
Right.
At least now we have some labels. I don't know whether he has ADHD or not, but he has a lot of the behaviors that I had,
Mm.
and I think that gives me so much gratification, in a sense, that I
Hmm.
can read the room, that I can be there for him, and for my grandkids, and to offer them some of this information. So that really inspires me a lot to make sure I get this writing done, and the memoir.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really having a great time in life. I think it's the more I keep Sue every day, she's in my mind, and
Yeah.
it's been a way that it's actually comforting, and I treasure that. I don't want to ever lose that.
Mm-hmm.
The woman
That's
I'm with
beautiful.
now also honors that as well. In fact, she actively talks to me about Sue and our relationship, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's where I get most of my inspiration from, is the family now and the people close to me, and
Mm-hmm.
getting rid of some of those energy draining
Yeah.
experiences.
Energy vampires, I call them.
Right.
My dad is the same. I have 6 grandchildren, so he's got 6 great-grandchildren. And my youngest son, he and his girlfriend just had twin girls. They're 5 months old now, I think, 5 or 6. And he spends a lot of time with them over there, and especially because my son is working there. They've agreed that, if it works, where his girlfriend can stay home and be with the kids for as long as possible, as long as they can financially do it. And so my dad will pop over during the week. One day during the week, he brings lunch. He spends hours with her and helps her with the babies. And they have a
Excellent.
3-year-old as well. And he just loves it. Anytime the kids are at my hive, one of my grandchildren, I have half time, and then the other 2, I have them on other weekends. And so when they're here, he's all about coming and hanging with them and being with them. It makes him happy. And that definitely is his, I think, part of his purpose now, where he wasn't
Good.
really sure,
Yeah, and if he recognizes that, he can
Yeah.
get more.
Yeah. Yeah. He does recognize it. He does
Yeah,
recognize it. We
excellent.
talk about it a lot. Um,
Excellent.
so, I mean, it kind of sounds like it'd be safe to say that you have emerged on the other side with a renewed sense of purpose and meaning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm working on it. I'm getting there. Um, it's, I think it's always going to be hard. But I liked the distinction that Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor said about grief and grieving. And so now I'm recognizing where some of that's coming from, and I'm able to
Right.
manage it a little bit better. Holidays are always hard, but and this year it's hard, but it's still
Mm-hmm.
manageable.
Yeah.
It's still manageable.
Yeah.
But
I understand, and one thing I treasure is that I no longer have fear in my heart to talk about what I'm feeling, and about Sue,
mm-hmm.
and about our relationship, and and with the kids, and if it's not my job, to stop somebody from crying.
Right.
I mean, if my kids break out and crying and stuff like that, that's not my job. It's their job.
Yeah.
I just want to be as honest as I can, and in fact, and not stop expressing those things.
Right.
So I feel that that's been a major accomplishment in my life, because I can't say how different I am now from the way I was, and I like the new me.
That's excellent. That's awesome. I think some people who are listening to this, you probably are exactly who they needed to hear today. So I'm grateful for that. Well, friends, we have come to the end of our time today. When we lose somebody, we will grieve forever. I say that all the time. We'll never get over it or move on, ever. We simply learn to live with the loss. We will always come across a question that will stump us. We will always have that inside voice as we navigate this new normal, but our lives do not need to lack purpose or joy. I have both joy and sadness. I'm finding purpose and love from a deeper place now. I live more intentionally. I don't remember the first time I was able to laugh after the deaths of my mom and Jasmine and Matthew, but I did eventually laugh, and I laugh now. I do remember telling my dad once that I felt guilty when I have good days. It felt like a betrayal to my children. I have many good days now without the guilt. Today, I feel and live freer. I'm setting better boundaries. I am learning and experiencing things I've always wanted to try. And most importantly, I say this on every podcast, I'm kind to myself. You have to be kind to yourself. This doesn't mean that I have forgotten what I've lost. I'm just coming to a place where I can now live with the loss as I work to rebuild and find joy in my new life. This honors their lives. It honors their memories. We must redefine and rediscover joy within ourselves and around us. In the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson, what lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. What lies within you? Dan, thank you for being a part of today's episode. And thanks to all of our listeners for joining us today. We hope you found this discussion inspiring and that maybe we've been able to shed some light on a challenging journey, that what was spoken today gives you the courage to take those first steps towards a brighter tomorrow. This is Beyond Goodbye, where the journey to finding life after loss begins. Subscribe now with your favorite podcast site, and let's continue walking this path together. Bye, all.